What's happening, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Crash Bang Boom podcast. Today's guest is drummer, clinician, instructor, and more in Reuben Spyker. Reuben and I do a relatively deep dive on hand technique and some of the aspects of both increasing speed, some of the misconceptions in developing it along the way, neuroscience, modern distractions, and a whole lot more. Check him out on Instagram at Reuben Spyker, one word, if you haven't already. Dude's killer. Crash Bang Boom podcast can be found on iTunes Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Luminary, Google Play, Podbean, and Amazon Music Podcast. Feel free to check out any of the previous 200 plus episodes. Give me a like, a subscription, or a positive review. The support is always appreciated. Shout out to my sponsor, New Orleans Record Press. If you're looking to release some vinyl, hit them up at neworleansrecordpress.com and check out all the electroplating, mastering, design, packaging, vinyl coloring options, and more, as well as their handy little real-time quote generator to keep tabs on everything. They also print 12 and 7-inch records in 150 and 180 gram variants, and they do small runs of 100 and larger runs up into the thousands, so hit them up, and that's neworleansrecordpress.com. Do please keep tabs on artist live streams, lesson tutorials, and masterclasses from your favorite musicians, as well as merch or physical releases that are for sale, as well as websites like saveourstages.com. Looking to assist venues in this tough time, or as Andrew Huberman has said, till we open her up like a can of beans. So without further ado, here we go, Reuben Spyker. Let's rip some paradiddles. Crash, bang, boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
Yeah! All right, I'm here with Reuben Spyker. Reuben, how you doing, man?
I'm doing really good. Thank you for asking. It's really sunny here, actually. So whenever the sun's out, I'm just naturally smiling all the time. So.
I hear you. You have good reason to be doing that. We went through a week of like snow and rain and everything else out here in Utah. So today, and actually yesterday, was like the first day where it was inching up to like 60 degrees, and it's sunny and it feels awesome. So I'm with you, man. And where are you located again?
So I am right around Vancouver in Canada, BC, just outside in a little town called Abbotsford, like 40 minutes from Vancouver.
There's an accent, a Canadian accent, where it's like these comes out like a boat is yeah, like when there's and it's one of those things like you have like the Dakotas. For me, being a Southerner, those accents sound hilarious to me. And then you have kind of a derivation of them as you go more and more north up into Canada, and then you all kind of have your own little accent up there. But from hearing you speak previously, I didn't detect. I was like, maybe he's from the Midwest. That's why I was asking. I wasn't sure. So yeah, you're a Canadian boy.
Definitely Canadian. Actually, a lot of people think I'm from Quebec because I have some way of pronouncing things, so I get that often as well. But I don't actually speak French.
Oh, wow. That's crazy, man.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for catching up with me, man. I'm a fan of your playing. I kind of started taking even that much more notice of you with one of your recent posts where you had a 260 BPM paradiddle, the turbo diddles, as I was calling them, which was insane. I was like, wow, somebody's been working on their hand technique. And turns out you are a guy who has been working quite extensively on hand technique and focusing on not only the physicality of that, but some of the mental aspects of it and everything else. So it'll be fun to sort of pick your brain as to the specifics on some of that stuff.
I would love to dive into that, yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, you recently did a Zoom Masterclass, I believe, focused on hand technique. Tell me a little bit about getting that together and some of the key points that you were looking to hit in doing it.
Sure, yeah. So that was actually the first time I've done my own kind of live stream in that way. I've done some work with Drumeo and done that kind of live stream with some other, not on my own. So this was like a nice learning curve for me to figure out how I can get the mics going, lighting set up, and try to look a little bit professional on my own.
Yeah.
And that was fun. So big learning curve. It was exciting to prepare that class, and it turned into about like a 3-hour epic nonstop. I didn't take a break, just talking hand technique and trying to get to everyone's questions. But my main focus was really to deconstruct and take like a deep dive into the advanced techniques like Moeller technique and push-pull, but really kind of trying to move a little bit more advanced and covering the more modern approach to Moeller techniques with players who you see like Joji playing. Yeah. Comparing it to the old school way that Jim Chapin taught and how it kind of evolved into the modern one, and then deconstructing the 4 different ways or 4 different styles of push-pull that I use, and also applying it to the kit and trying to how you can boost your rudiments and play those 260 BPM paradiddles and that kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
The pointless stuff that will actually get you fired from a gig.
Yeah, right. Totally. If they give you a drum solo, that's your moment in time. Assuming that you can work it up to those BPMs, feel free to rip some 260 BPM paradiddles in your drum solo, assuming the band or band leader will allow you to do so.
Right, but I mean, like, if you're covering classic rock in a bar and you get a solo, like, just play to the music. Don't bust out your 260.
You got a point there. You got a point there.
I've tried that before when I was younger.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Oh man. Well, as far as hand technique for me, I got a little taste of it in marching band, some more from one of my friends who was kind of in the drum corps world. And then again, when both two DVDs came out, I started getting back into it. And that was Jojo Mayer's DVD, as well as Tommy Igoe's Great Hands for a Lifetime. And I've been getting into that more recently as well and trying to get through it. I can get through most of the intermediate one. And of course, something will inevitably trip me up. But in pursuing hand technique, it's, in my experience, a pretty tedious task because it kind of takes some hyper focus to just sit there on a drum pad with, oftentimes, with a metronome and really dial in, make sure all the notes are lined in and that you're getting evenness in your notes. But because of the tedious nature of that, I think a lot of people probably shy away from really the hyper focus of it. But then they'll conversely also say that they want to be able to play as fast as possible. So it's what has been your sort of trek in discovering and getting into this and the time that you spent kind of perfecting some of these things.
So going off what you just said of like a large group of people will make the decision to like, okay, now I'm going to deconstruct my technique and I really want to be able to play this insane stuff and get there. And they'll immediately dive into the hard stuff and they might be able to get it for a few days, but then their interest will just peter out and then they just kind of like take a dive.
Sure.
And they go back into what they're comfortable with. And I think it goes back to where not everybody, but a large amount of people try to run before they walk and they try walking before they can even crawl.
Sure.
Like the only way you're going to master anything technique related or through any kind of motion is like, if you can understand you're going to have to crawl first and then walk and then run and you can't skip any of those steps, then you're going to be able to accomplish your goals. And then you're also going to accomplish them much faster because you won't have to backtrack.
Right.
But that analogy of like crawling, walking, and running is something I've heard Andrew Huberman, who's this crazy PhD neuroscientist, talk about. And he has that for his, like, that's what he says differentiates top performers versus the people who maybe don't accomplish their goals all the time.
Right.
So I thought it was a cool takeaway, and I think it really applies to really anything you want to learn on the kid, whether it's technique or, maybe it's just a new groove or something.
Right.
But one other, maybe the most important part for learning technique is, since it's a physical motion and you're going to be trying to adapt that motion to yourself, one of the most important things you can do is work on your observational skills. So if you check out someone like Tiger Woods, a professional golfer, he works with a coach to try and help him fix his swing. Mm-hmm. And or you check out players like Kobe Bryant. I'm not a basketball player, so I don't know much about Kobe Bryant, but I do know that he watched game footage after every single game, and He'd watch back the game footage and critique himself and, how can I do better here and do better here? He's working on his observational skills that way. So if you want to become good at a physical skill or motion, you need to be really good at watching yourself back, and you can do this easily with your phone. You record it. You have to be very good at being able to watch back and critique yourself and being able to pick out those things. And, you mentioned the hyper focus. You do need to be laser focused to pick out those things. But I think that is probably the most important skill to work on for learning technique, is develop your observational skills, and it'll really help you to improve. Right. Because it's physical motions.
Yeah. And it's something that I've spoken about as well, and that it's a slippery slope, and that in a couple of ways. One, in practicing technique, you can get so overwhelmed or so focused on technique that then you could find it hard to get to kind of more of a flow state because you're still in such a cerebral place about what you are not doing. So it is, again, a slippery slope. And I think I would imagine that you've experienced some of that as well, and really pursuing the fine motions of these little small muscle groups and really perfecting this stuff. And then at some point, if you have to work in a like more of a jazz context, you have to be, all that work has to be done. You don't have to throw it out the window, but at that point it's baked in. And then hopefully you're more or less in the moment and not so much in your own head about what technically you need to be playing and what sticking you need to be playing.
Definitely. Getting out of your own head and getting out of your way, that's the key for sure.
Yeah.
Whenever you are playing music, as long as you're always thinking of the music, you will never feel like you have to get out of your own head. But as soon as you're playing jazz music and you're thinking like, oh, I should really pull out that thing I've been working on, then you're going to trip yourself up immediately. Mm-hmm. And that was something I absolutely had to work on, to just make sure that as soon as I notice when I'm entering into a headspace like that, I need to get rid of it, because everything goes downhill as soon as I enter that kind of,
right.
Like, you could be playing simple music. You could be playing, I also used to play in church a lot, and that's where I started playing, was in church. And in my younger years, you're learning Stuart Copeland stuff, and I was like, I really want to just like, I've been shedding this, and here's the tune, and I'm playing, and then you try to insert this thing. But if you're trying to force this stuff into the wrong context, you leave the headspace, and then you're not thinking about the music anymore, and then it just goes completely downhill. You lose the timing, you lose everything. So yeah, same goes for technique. If you're trying to insert technique and just make it happen, it's going to trip you up big time, and it's going to be incredibly frustrating.
Right.
So focus on the music.
Yeah. And that also is kind of a nebulous concept as well in focus on the music, because I think what is musical can be so subjective. I mean, if I do nothing but listen to Mahavishnu Orchestra and Mr. Bungle, my point of reference is going to be something that's pretty wild. So I think it does tie back to what you were saying about the observational aspect, and that listening to it, not only what you're playing, but both what you're playing, how it fits into the larger piece of music, i.e. the context, but also how the people in the band or the group or whatever are receiving it, So there are levels to sort of understanding the musicality of it all. And again, it can be quite subjective, but developing those additional elements as well are also pretty crucial if you want to get to a certain level, I would say, at playing, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, something you were mentioning earlier was the flow state thing.
Yeah.
If you can enter a flow state, that's when you're going to make like the most progress. And same for whatever you're working on. If you can enter a flow state for your practice session, that's when you're going to make the most amount of progress. And I think same for when you're playing music. Like if you can enter a flow state, it's going to be the most enjoyable, and
But again, getting to that place, it's already not the easiest thing. It's not like, with everyone's different. We all have different learning modalities. We have different ways of doing all this stuff. But if you do enough work and have it in a muscle memory level, hopefully once again, you can sort of get out of that cerebral state and hopefully just start stringing these concepts together. I mean, that's the idea. But that being said, that's easier said than done, in my opinion.
You mentioned muscle memory. Can I break that down for a sec?
Absolutely.
So I first heard about muscle memory. I don't know when exactly that was, but I just started using that term all the time just because I heard everyone throw that term around. But recently I started just wondering if that really makes sense, because really our muscles are actually nothing else other than muscle tissue, and they have no form of memory. They have no form of anything. So really, what is this thing of muscle memory is actually, that term is wrong.
Right.
But I didn't want to say that because I'm not a neuroscientist and I don't know for sure. So I waited until I heard a neuroscientist talk about this, and now I'm super excited because this guy, it was again the guy named Andrew Huberman, which I mentioned earlier, but he took that phrase of muscle memory and he broke it down like this. He's like, it's not muscle memory. The concept of muscle memory is correct. So this idea that as you repeat a motion, it becomes easier and easier to do until it gets locked in. And that's often what people call muscle memory. Mm-hmm. But just think of it as neural memory instead of muscle memory, because you have these neurons upper and lower motor neurons, which work together to twitch those muscles.
Right.
So it's those neurons which are apparently, the thing that's actually making that happen. So
Sure.
now I'm just excited to try and, whenever I hear someone say muscle memory, I'm like, hey, that's actually neural memory, and I'm trying to, but yeah, that's something I also want to learn much more about, is the whole thing about neurons and all these crazy neuroscience things, because I really hardly know anything. But these guys like Andrew Huberman, who really break it down to like an easy level for people like myself to understand. I find it really fascinating. So
Super
sorry,
cool.
like sidebar.
No, not at all. And I mean, the irony of it is that while not being technically correct, muscle memory at a superficial level, the idea is that it feels as though you can just turn your brain off and think about paying taxes or cooking dinner, and you can still perform these things because it's the repetition is there. But yes, the origin is still stemming from our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is that you can do something, and once it becomes second nature, is that you can kind of think about something else. And so you can, like, okay, if you've practiced your paradiddles enough, you can play paradiddles, and you can think about what you're going to make for dinner or something. That is something I've had to, as I progress as a player and you work on new things, it's something that I really have to make an effort to catch myself doing. So if I'm practicing and maybe it's something that I've started to lock in, I need to really pay attention to as soon as my mind shifts. Because what happens if you start practicing that way of like, okay, I'm playing a paradiddle, but you're thinking about whatever else you like, you're becoming world-class at practicing your paradiddles while thinking about something else. So you're really not becoming world-class at just playing a paradiddle. You're becoming world-class at being distracted playing paradiddles. So it's something it's like a little bit more of a recent thing I've noticed that I really need to rein in a little bit, because I don't want to catch myself playing jazz music or whatever when I'm supposed to be thinking of the form of the tune. And then I catch myself thinking, how is my posture, or how is, did they catch my dinner order properly? I'm starving, like trying to keep that voice quiet.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, maybe it stems because we're so distracted all the time as humans.
Absolutely.
Or at least in the modern environment that we have, like, it's just easy for us to just like bounce around. And, I think it's probably more of a modern day issue than it was like in the 60s or 50s with those players, because everything is completely different.
Totally.
Those guys or girls or women could sit down and practice, and they don't have their cell phone pinging and making notifications, interrupting their practice, shifting their focus.
Right.
I've heard Bob Reynolds talk about this, and I think it's a really valid point of like, they used to have to hear an idea on a record, and then once that idea passed that they wanted to transcribe or whatever, there's no way for them to pause it and just easily set it back. They have to wait for it to start over again or try to drop the needle.
Right.
And it's not going to line up properly. So they probably had a little bit of a better way to be like, they're able to pay attention a bit more because they had to, because if they didn't pay attention more, they would miss this spot. Whereas we have it where you can open up iTunes, play a song, and just keep dragging it back. You don't really need to pay attention because it's just so easy for you to drop back. You can come back anytime.
Sure. Question about the jazz world. I studied a little bit of jazz, kind of like independence and stuff, with some guys down in New Orleans, and one of the two instructors that I had in particular, maybe more like the Brazilian Afro-Cuban kind of interpretations of that as applied to the drum set. And with jazz is interesting. I think, especially in New Orleans, with such a roots music city, that in sort of pursuing really rigid chops for me, which I feel like is sort of what is needed to a certain extent to increase at least speed. I felt like it could also potentially affect your feel. So you kind of have to, or at least for me, and I think I would imagine a lot of drummers, you kind of have to delineate between the two and say, while I'm practicing this, this is just for this. And then when I get here, once again, I'm sort of abandoning that to some degree, and I'm just more focused on feel. But I found that yet another slippery slope, as I was saying earlier, in sort of, again, sort of the rigid nature of perfecting all of those, all the chops and everything, and then just being like a player for feel. Has that been a little bit of a struggle for you in operating in the jazz world, and sort of pursuing the chops on one end and then being sort of a loose, dynamic, field-based jazz player on the other end?
It's something that I'm always still trying to improve on. I think every area of my playing, I'm always trying to get a little bit better, but especially in feel and consistency and stuff as well. Because that's like where you like feel and dynamics is where you can like hit people's soul, right? Like that's where
Right.
you can really, your emotion comes out and everything. But I think if someone is practicing technique and they feel like their feel is suffering, you should try to deconstruct that. What's happening? Why is your technique all of a sudden making your feel go down the toilet? Why is that happening? And especially if it's something that you're trying to change your technique because you have an issue of like holding the stick this way and you have carpal tunnel syndrome, so you're trying to learn technique to prevent yourself from having these injuries, and you feel that this new technique is actually starting to affect your feel. That's really something to start putting under, or start to put under the microscope and try to figure out why.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because if you focus too much on technique, the part of your brain becomes occupied with thinking like, okay, I need to be loose here. I need to make sure this. So part of your brain is you're playing this music and now you're thinking about trying to stay loose and trying to think about this technique stuff. And then now it's ruining your feel. I'm making a guess here, but
I think I would tie it almost certainly to if you're, and we can talk about the process because we didn't touch on it too much, about sort of increasing those BPMs and ironing out rudiments at higher BPMs. But in doing so, more often than not, you're kind of doing this incrementally alongside a metronome of some sort. So the constant reinforcement of a metronome and the straightness of it and you ironing out all of those specific aspects of it, that starts to drill into your quote unquote feel. I think that's where it can happen. That's just me.
Yeah, I think it's good to practice without a metronome as well. Like practice your 200 whatever BPM paradiddles with the metronome, but spend time away from the metronome as well, so that you're not just relying on the click for the pulse.
Right.
And that you can actually maybe focus a little bit more on adding some dynamics and being a little bit more creative maybe.
Right. Yeah, right. Well, I mentioned it briefly, but as far as I know, in talking to people like John Longstreth, sort of some of these like extreme metal guys who play crazy BPMs and are doing sustained blast beats and all this stuff, their way to sort of get there was, again, to sort of incrementally increase the BPMs, because you're going to have a threshold. And if you're looking to push that and get to these higher levels of speed, it's kind of at a certain level about increasing that or just incrementally pushing that more and more until you can just get up there. So for you I highly doubt that you just sat down and you were playing paradiddles at 260 BPM. So when you started sort of looking at that aspect of it, where did you find was your threshold and what was the process of increasing it?
It's actually exactly what you said. So it's always been like, just like if you, for example, picture a person running around a track that is a professional runner trying to beat their best time. The only way they're going to improve is if they run a lap, see what their time is, and they say, okay, I'm going to try this next one. I'm going to try beat it by 1 second.
Yeah.
So then they run it again, and they have to try run faster.
Yeah.
So if you want to get faster playing paradiddles or singles or whatever rudiment or whatever it is, the only way you're going to do it is find the tempo where you're comfortable at. Now try bump it up by 3 BPM and see if you can hold on for a minute. And then if you can, bump it up 3 BPM again, and then again, and do that until the only amount of time you can hold on is for like 5 individual strokes, and then everything falls apart.
Right.
So that'll be your new practicing point. And that should be like, for the next 2 weeks, just see if you can hit 6 consecutive strokes, and then 7. And then maybe it'll take you a month to be able to play like 2 bars or whatever at that tempo. And that's how you slowly increase your speed. But you have to work on it every single day.
Right.
So that was exactly the process for myself. And I still use that process because you can always get a little bit faster, a little bit more clean and controlled. But that's the simple way on how to build speed, is just like slowly challenge yourself with the BPM, bumping it up every couple weeks or month or.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't remember what tempo I started at and what tempo. I don't really remember what that was. But I started out just like everyone else, and I might, just warning you, since I'm saying everyone else, I might go into a sidebar of like, I don't think people are necessarily born genius. I think you have to learn how to do it and train it, because all these geniuses were born with the same information that we had. They were just more passionate than we were to be able to put in the time and practice and get to that genius level. That's my, sorry, total sidebar again.
One of the interesting things that you said in there and talking about that, sort of running through those BPMs again, was just the duration aspect of it. Because if you could play a certain rudiment or stroke, whatever, for just 4 reps at a certain BPM, you're like, got it. It's like, well, can you do it, like you said, for a minute? Can you do it for 2 minutes? Because then that's in a whole nother world. And to perpetuate those motions, you really have to be both relaxed and extremely focused on the sort of micro movements it takes to be able to get to that. And once again, that's some tedious shit.
Tedious shit. I like it.
Yeah.
When I'm doing that stuff, I kind of like to have 3 different tempos. So I have my speed threshold of how long I can hold something for like 3 minutes or above 3 minutes.
Right.
Then I have my speed threshold for how long I can hold something for 1 minute. And then the next one is like, how fast can I possibly go? And I can probably only hold it for 30 to 20 seconds before it falls apart.
Right.
So you're going to have kind of those 3 categories, I think.
Well, you mentioned drumming in church. Is that where you started drumming? And what age was that happening for you?
So my dad was a drummer at church, and in the 80s, he got the long hair down to his butt and the huge, massive drum kit. In church, he's got like this huge 8-piece kit with like rototoms there.
Nice.
It was actually really epic. I don't really remember him playing it very much because I was so young, but
wow.
Of course, just like if your dad plays drums, most likely he's going to bring you and sit you on his lap, and then so he was doing that when I was probably 2 years old, and
wow.
He'd hold my hands and make me play the kit and stuff. But and then once everyone would go downstairs, and I got a little bit older, like 5, everyone would go downstairs to have coffee, because it's like a Dutch church, and they're obsessed with coffee and refreshments. So,
okay.
Like if you know Dutch people or European people, you go to their house, the first thing they do is pour you like a cup of coffee with some cookies, and that's like super Dutch.
Yeah.
Where my last name is from. Anyways, so everyone would go downstairs, and then I would just make noise on the drums upstairs.
Wow.
So yeah, that's where I started.
That's great. At some point, did your dad impart any sort of technique onto you, or did that come more in the form of you studying with somebody at some point?
No. So like everything that I do, it just became a gradual obsession. And then when I decided I liked drums, everything else in my life just got cut off, and then I was just like, boom, everything drums. And then eventually then I got hooked on every part from technique, and you go down that rabbit hole. And but my dad, he only played there for maybe like 5 years, and then he stopped playing. But while we were going there, and I don't remember how old I was, he sort of taught me how to play like one beat, and then we left that church and actually left the drums there. I still don't understand why.
Because it was too fucking big.
I think so. or my mom was just like, there's no way you're taking that thing home.
Totally.
I don't know what it was. Anyways, but then we didn't get the kit. We got it back eventually, but it wasn't until I was in like middle school. So there was a chunk of time when like we had like this one random drum thing at home, and they tried buying me like a toy drum set, but I destroyed it.
Yeah.
It's like usually what kids do when they get a toy drum kit.
Exactly.
And I would play pots and pans. It's usually that's like a bullshit story, but I actually have a photo of me playing pots and pans.
Oh, nice. You'll have to send that to me.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so he didn't really impart any wisdom on technique and anything like that, because yeah, he ended up quitting the playing a little when I was still quite young. But he did, the knowledge he did pass on was that when we got the drum kit back, I was like, Dad, okay, we have the drums back now. Who is the best drummer in the world? I just want to see what that looks like. And he was like, oh, it's Neil Peart from Rush.
Oh, wow.
So like that was my first sort of like, okay, I got the drums back, and that's who I need to kind of, try and emulate. So that's where it started.
Wow.
Yeah.
proper Canadian answer as well. He's like, let me
Yeah,
tell you about
that's-
this Canadian drummer and band. Yes, son.
Yeah. So that's really what he passed on. He passed on the excitement of, playing drums, and then he was like, check out this guy. And then that's what's just started me on the obsession.
Wow. So did you go to school for it, or did you have any teachers at any point, or are you primarily self-taught?
I am pretty much completely self-taught, but
Wow.
when you say self-taught, sort of still a lie, because
Right.
you can say you're self-taught, but you're just observing someone else, learning through them by observing them.
Sure.
It's just a different form of learning. So I learned by watching YouTube videos of people like Dave Weckl and all these players, and then of course Neil Peart, and then I got Joji Mayer's DVD.
Oh yeah.
And I did have two random instructors later on from church who just decided they had some free time and they were going to give me some lessons. So I took some random lessons. One guy was just teaching me beats out of Carmen Apice's realistic rock book.
Nice.
We only did like maybe, I don't know how many lessons, but it was only for a few weeks.
Yeah.
And then then I didn't really learn much from teachers until I went to university, and then I had another private instructor, and he taught me how to read and that sort of thing. But by that point, I was already deep into the Joji Mayer phase, so I already had all of that kind of thing from just obsessing and watching every freaking Joji Mayer clip and video I could find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny, man. When I was in New York for 15 years, so I got to see JoJo throughout the years, and he was and still is and will likely always be one of my all-time favorite drummers, man. That guy's creative spirit, his ear, and his the intellectual side of him, his ability to articulate all of this stuff. It's just so good. In fact, it goes back to sort of what we were talking about. He's got a great quote about it when asked, like, how someone can play faster. His response was, well, how fast can you hear? And that is absolutely so true, because I'll be like, I'm going to do like a little 30-second note thing here. And then if I listen back to it, I'm like, that's a mess. And that's really not even quite in time necessarily. I'm playing a bunch of notes and I maybe sort of landing where I need to, sort of. But again, because I wasn't really hearing how that would play out and where those notes would be, I wasn't necessarily playing it the way that I should have. So that's a quote from JoJo that is ever so poignant.
Yeah, that quote will never get old, because you can play 300 BPM single stroke roll on the pad, but as soon as you decide to try play something musical at 300 BPM because you're playing some crazy bop tune or whatever, and all you've done is practice a single stroke roll at 300 BPM, and you've never worked on any kind of musical idea or trying to turn that into something interesting, you're not even going to be able to play it because you can't hear ideas that match the music at that tempo. So it's really, that quote will never get old.
Totally. It's also another thing to practice this stuff. And then, when the voicings change, everything kind of changes with it. Like some of the crazy drumming that you, speaking of 30-second notes and stuff like that, just by changing the voicing and maybe playing more hi-hat stuff, and then overlapping the one for a bar or something, I'm like, oh, it just, in changing those voicings, it sounds like a totally different thing, and it's just almost like it's suspended in time. Like I don't even quite know where they're being oriented. And I know we could go into do an entire podcast, I'm sure, on just like modulation practices and this and that and the other, and shifting all that stuff, and that stuff would certainly help. But to your point, it's one thing just to be playing on a pad, and then you still have to orchestrate it on a kit, right? So then there's that process.
Or to be able to just hear it in a musical context. Like you can still play ideas on one surface, like a practice pad or only a snare drum, and you can make a simple idea sound musical and interesting, but it's like, if you haven't worked on trying to grow those ideas, and if you haven't worked on trying to like, okay, how musical can I make a paradiddle sound on one surface, and how far can I really stretch it, you're gonna find that when you jump behind the kit in any kind of context, you might run out of ideas really quickly. You don't necessarily need many licks, but you do need to know how to converse with other musicians. You need to know how to be able to almost play through your kit like speaking, rather than trying to fall back on all your ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, speaking of drum sets, I'm a big fan of both the snares and the drum kits that you play. I guess you're with the kit wise, you're with George Way, and then on the snare end, you're with Dunnett. Tell me a little bit about hooking up with them and that, because I think I've spoken to maybe one other drummer who at the time was playing George Way, but you might be one of the only other ones that I've spoken to. And every time I hear those kits, I think they sound absolutely amazing. And those Dunnett snares sound incredible as well.
In my opinion, he has to be the most talented snare drum craftsman on the planet.
Wow.
He really takes it to another level, thinking about things and also just going against the grain of what, usually big companies try to do when they sell like a snare drum. They'll be like, that 45-degree bearing edge is the reason that this drum sounds so good.
Yeah.
But then if you hang out with Ron, he'll show you that, like, okay, here is what an actually completely square bearing edge sounds like. Like, there's literally no bearing edge. And here is one with a 45-degree angle bearing edge. Now tell me the difference. And you can't. So, like, I love that part about Ron, is where he's like, cut out all the bullshit like that and just focus on what actually changes the sound. And one of the huge reasons his snare drum sounds so good is because he really creates huge snare beds in his, like, he cuts big, wide snare beds.
Yeah.
And that allows the wires, you can use fatter wires for one thing, but it also allows them to be a lot more sensitive on the head. So you can crank the bottom head, and you'll find that when you play one of his snare drums and it's, the bottom is tuned nicely, you'll be blown away with the sensitivity. And I'm convinced it's because of his snare beds. And if you ask him, he will tell you that's what it is. But
wow,
yeah, he's just on another level. And I also think that he makes his drums like, it's like owning a Ferrari of snare drums. It's like beautifully crafted,
totally
handcrafted, and yeah. So
amazing.
I love his drums. But he's actually a local guy here.
Oh man.
So I live about 45 minutes away from Ron. He lives in an area called Delta, just outside Vancouver. So as I've grown up out here and gotten to know people in the scene, I slowly heard about the legend of Ron Dunnett and these brands that he and George Way drums, and I slowly started learning about it through that. So as I progressed as a player and started meeting more people and working with Drumeo and all of that kind of thing, I was able to really get connected with Ron that way. And so it was just like a very slow relationship, I guess, that just sort of, grew to what it is.
Awesome. And then as far as the George Way drums, is there a connection between George Way and those snares? What's that connection?
So Ron also owns George Way drums. George Way was a drum manufacturer back in the day. And that, like, way back when, there's a whole history between Camco, George Way, DW. There's a whole big history, which I need to learn a little bit more about. I don't know all the details.
Yeah.
But, anyway, George Way has passed away, and Ron has taken that brand. He bought the name, and he's tried to sort of breathe new life into that brand again, staying as true as possible to the original George Way, and then trying to and trying to, like I just said, breathe new life into the brand and introduce some new types of woods, some small different changes to hardware and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's kind of like an old school brand that has been revamped and a little bit modernized, but still definitely stays true to the original vibe.
Super cool. Yeah, they're amazing sound and drums. And that's interesting that you mentioned the Camco DW connection, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like when they're not doing the tube lugs on those drums, do they have that kind of round lug that both Camco and ultimately DW is probably more well known for?
So here is like the interesting thing of like, it's some like drama shit.
Okay.
But like George Way was actually the guy who first, I'm pretty sure this is what it is he invented that round lug, which is now that DW one you see.
Right. And which Camco had for, yeah.
So Ron has created a new style of lug, sort of, it's the George Way design, but it's a little bit different, just very like slight differences. And at the bottom of it, it has a little bit of a square thing with like a round shape to it. So it is a little bit different, has a bit of a different shape, but it does have that George Way round look to it.
Wow, man. So yeah, you're all up on those designs then, between the drum set and the snare. That's really cool that you have a relationship with him. Well, going forward, man, what do you have going on? Do you have any more classes that you're looking to put out? I don't know if you've been doing lessons, etc. What do you have going on now that we're sort of getting a little bit out of the weeds with this coronavirus shit, and maybe even might start seeing live music at some point soon?
Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah, I've been teaching lessons whenever I can, and I'm actually painting right now, which sounds crazy, but that's like what I've been making my money doing. So I used to work at Drumeo for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And the last year that I was working there, I was running all their social media. So everything you saw on Instagram and YouTube up until last August is when I had my last day at the office there.
Wow.
I was doing that, and I just got crazy burnt out. I couldn't keep up with my own social and all their social, and just completely burnt out from that. So I talked with Jared and Dave, and there wasn't really an area for me to go into from there, because I was doing community management first, and then I went into the social media role once that opened up. The guy who was doing it before had left, and that was cool. I did it for the 1.5 years, and then since there was nowhere for me to go into, I just am still connected as an artist there, but just not in the office. So
Gotcha.
I had to start painting to make some extra money. And so this year, since I'm not doing that, I would love to play more gigs when they open up again.
Hell yeah.
When I was working at Drumeo before, I was actually not playing a whole lot of gigs because it's a 9-to-5 job, and you got to make sure you're doing that. So I guess shouldn't necessarily be an excuse to not be able to play gigs, but I definitely wasn't able to do things like take 2 weeks off and play a tour or something.
Right.
So this year, I would love to, when gigs open up, play some more gigs, and I really want to create a new album.
Nice.
I made one album a couple of years ago with some friends. It's like some improvised modern jazz kind of stuff, but I want to make a better one.
Yeah.
So I would love to do that this year.
Awesome, man. Very cool. Well, Reuben, it was fun talking to you, man. I appreciate the hang. And yeah, man, keep me posted on all your stuff, and we'll have to catch up soon, man.
I would love to. Thank you very much for having me. You have so many incredible drummers on the podcast. I've really been checking out all the episodes with the many different talented and inspirational players you have. So
nice.
It's an honor, and thank you again very much.
Yeah, man. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Reuben, for rapping. Definitely cool talking about some of the more technical aspects of increasing speed and everything associated with it, as well as some of the misconceptions, neuroscience, and all that good stuff. It's a fun talk. Faux show. We'll catch you on the next one. Crash, bang, boom.